She asked, "Why does this feel like flying?" He smiled, "Because you're safe in my arms." In a quiet coastal town where the waves whispered against the shore, Emily often walked alone, carrying with her the heavy silence of a past she wished she could escape. Life had left her cautious, unwilling to trust too easily, and her heart had learned to build walls instead of bridges. One evening, as the horizon burned with the colors of sunset, Emily found herself at the old wooden pier, lost in thought. Her foot slipped against the weathered planks, and before she could fall, strong arms caught her. Startled, she looked up into the calm eyes of a man she had never seen before. His name was David. His touch was firm, his voice soft, and in that moment, Emily felt something she had long forgotten: safety. The days that followed seemed to draw them together in ways neither could explain. David was unlike anyone she had ever known. He carried his own scars, yet wore them with quiet strength. He spoke not with grand promises, but with sincerity, and Emily found herself listening to his every word. They walked by the shoreline, their footprints side by side in the sand, the ocean wind tangling their laughter. Under the night sky, he told her stories of storms he had weathered, and she felt a strange comfort in knowing he too had battled darkness. Slowly, the walls around, her heart began to weaken. Every time his hand brushed against hers, she felt the ground slip away, as though gravity itself had grown softer. Still, Emily wrestled with doubt. Could she truly allow herself to trust again? Love had failed her before, leaving wounds that had never quite healed. Yet with David there was no pressure, only presence. His silences spoke louder than words, and his gaze seemed to hold her even when he said nothing at all. One evening, as the waves crashed beneath the cliffs, David pulled her into his arms. The world seemed to disappear, the chaos within her replaced by a peace she didn't know she could feel. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with freedom. With tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, she whispered, "Why does this feel like flying?" David looked at her, his smile gentle, his words steady as the tide. "Because you're safe in my arms," he said. It was a simple truth, yet it unlocked something inside her that no elaborate promise ever could. For the first time in years, Emily felt whole, as though every broken piece of her had finally found its place. From that moment forward, she no longer feared what love could take from her. Instead, she embraced what it could give: wings to soar, strength to heal, and a home in someone else's embrace. David had not only caught her when she fell, he had taught her to rise. Days melted into weeks, and without realizing it, Emily found herself searching for reasons to cross paths with David again. What began as chance meetings soon turned into intentional encounters. She would wander by the shore where she knew he often walked, or linger by the marketplace a little longer than usual, hoping to catch sight of him. Each time their eyes met, there was an unspoken warmth that drew her closer. David carried himself with a calm strength, a man who bore his own scars yet refused to let them define him. He never boasted, never demanded attention, yet his presence was enough to fill the silence around him. Emily, who had always guarded her heart, started to feel the unfamiliar rhythm of trust forming between them. Their conversations flowed with ease, sometimes about simple things like the weather or the sound of the sea, and other times about the deeper wounds life had carved into them. Under the stars, they shared stories that belonged to no one else. Secrets released into the night as if the sky itself could keep them safe. David listened without judgment, and Emily found herself speaking truths she had never dared to say, aloud. Each word felt lighter, each confession a piece of weight lifted from her chest. The walls she had built over years of pain and betrayal slowly began to crumble, not because David pushed them down, but because he stood patiently outside, waiting for her to open the door. There were moments of quiet, too, moments where they didn't need words. Walking along the beach, the sound of waves became their conversation, and the brush of his hand against hers carried more comfort than any promise could. Emily noticed how her heart no longer raced with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating freedom. Every time David held her hand, it felt as though the ground beneath her softened, as if the world itself was lifting her higher. She had lived so long with the burden of doubt that this lightness felt almost impossible. And yet, it was real. Still, deep inside, Emily hesitated. She reminded herself of the pain she had endured before, of how love had once arrived only to vanish, leaving her broken and weary. Could she trust this feeling now? Or was it just another fleeting illusion, one more fragile hope waiting to be shattered? She studied David quietly, searching for cracks, for signs that he might one day leave, her standing alone again. But all she ever saw was his steady gaze, a look that never wavered, a strength that seemed unshakable. In his company, her fears began to soften, though they never fully disappeared. She found herself wanting to believe, wanting to surrender, yet a part of her still held back. And in that delicate balance between longing and hesitation, hope and fear, Emily realized that she was on the edge of something greater than she had ever known. It wasn't falling she was afraid of anymore. It was learning how to fly. The evening had arrived with the sky painted in fading gold and soft indigo, the sea restless as if it carried secrets only the waves could understand. Emily stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind tangling her hair, the salty air brushing her cheeks like a reminder that she was alive. She felt both fragile and strong in that moment, like the world could swallow her whole. Yet, for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of falling. David stepped closer, his footsteps steady against the rocks, and without hesitation he wrapped his arms around her. His embrace was warm, firm, and unyielding, a shelter against the wildness of the night. For a heartbeat, Emily wanted to resist, but her body betrayed her fears, melting into the comfort she had long denied herself. Her breath caught in her throat, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she was safe. Time seemed to pause as the world around them softened into silence, the roar of the ocean fading into the background. Emily closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of his heartbeat guide her own. She could feel the years of loneliness and doubt unraveling inside her, every guarded thought slipping away like sand through her fingers. For so long, she had believed that closeness was dangerous, that love was a trap waiting to break her again. Yet here, held tightly in David's arms, there was no threat, only peace. The ground no longer felt beneath her feet. It was as if she had risen above it all, carried by something she couldn't explain. With tears forming in her eyes, she whispered the words that had been circling her heart. "Why does this feel like flying?" David looked at her with a tenderness she had never known, a softness that carried the weight of truth without needing explanation. His lips curved into a quiet smile, and his voice, steady and calm, cut through the noise of the waves as he answered, "Because you're safe in my arms." The simplicity of his reply struck her deeper than any declaration of love ever could. It was not a promise of forever, nor an elaborate string of words meant to impress. It was real, grounded, and enough to dissolve every chain that had bound her. In that moment, Emily felt her heart breaking open, not in pain, but in release. She realized she didn't need to keep fighting the memories of her past or fearing what tomorrow might bring. All that mattered was the safety she felt right now, the undeniable truth that she was no longer alone. The fear that had once caged her heart gave way to freedom, and the weight she had carried for years finally lifted. Resting her head against David's chest, she let the tears fall freely, not of sadness, but of rebirth. For the first time in her life, she wasn't falling. She was learning how to soar. From that night onward, Emily began to see the world differently. The shadows that once lingered over her life no longer had the same power, because she carried the memory of that moment in David's arms wherever she went. She no longer woke. In the mornings weighed down by doubt, but instead with a quiet sense of peace that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't that her scars had vanished. They remained, etched into her story, but now they no longer defined her. They were simply reminders of how far she had come and how much she had survived. With David by her side, she found herself moving with a freedom she had never known before, as though her steps were lighter and her spirit had finally remembered. How to breathe. Their days began to weave together in ways that felt natural, effortless, and unshakable. Walking along the shoreline hand in hand, Emily no longer feared the emptiness that used to echo in her chest. The sound of David's laughter filled spaces she once thought would remain hollow forever. In his presence, she discovered that love wasn't about perfection or grand gestures. It was about consistency, about the quiet moments when he noticed her silence and reached for her hand without a word. It was about the way he looked at her not as someone broken, but as someone whole, someone worth cherishing. Slowly, she realized that she no longer braced herself for disappointment because she trusted the foundation they had built together. There were nights when Emily would wake from dreams of her past, her chest tight, her mind tangled in old fears. But David was always there, his arm draped protectively around her, his voice steady as he whispered that she was safe. Those simple reassurances carried her back into calm, reminding her that she wasn't alone in her battles anymore. Love, she discovered, wasn't about erasing pain but about standing together in it, finding strength not only in herself but in the one who held her close. Each morning after, she would look at him and feel gratitude for a second chance she never thought she'd deserve. In time, Emily came to understand the true meaning of the words David had spoken. Because you're safe in my arms. Safety had once been an illusion to her, something she thought she'd never feel again. Yet now it was real, something she could trust, something she could return to whenever the world felt too heavy. It was in his arms that she learned not just to heal, but to grow, not just to survive, but to live. She had once believed love was a risk too great to take, but David showed her it was the very thing that gave her wings. And so, with every heartbeat, every step, and every embrace, Emily carried the promise of that night, the promise that love could truly set her free.